I need to be fair. I did not think I was asking for anything unreasonable. The thing is, I had spent 15 years learning the difference between what something looked like and what it actually was. I ran a gallery. I was the best eye in most rooms I entered, and the mood in my marriage had changed, and I had looked at it, and I had reached a conclusion that seemed correct. 3 weeks before the first hearing, a note fell out of my coat pocket, and I stood in a kitchen that was no longer mine and understood that a good eye and a clear line of sight are not the same thing. My name is Sloane Varga, and I have run Meridian Gallery for 4 years. The thing is, I have always known exactly what belongs on a wall. People who work in my field say that I have a good eye. I have never had any good reason to disagree with any of them. Joel arrived at the gallery loading dock that cold November evening at 6:50. He had the dock key because I gave it to him 2 years ago. He brought dinner from the Vietnamese place because he knew I had not eaten. He knew the Tbilisi artist by name because he had looked her up himself. He said one slightly wrong thing about her work that proved he genuinely looked. On Sundays, we went to the market and cooked something we could not manage. We always ate the failures and called them something better than what they were. Those were some of the only things I did not need to curate at all. The hand-painted mugs were on the kitchen shelf when we came home that night. We had painted our initials on them at a pottery class in our first year. Both of the bowls we made that night collapsed before they ever dried out. A newsletter arrived on my phone with my father's name in the subject line. He had won another award for a civic building he had designed in Copenhagen. The photograph showed him standing in front of a glass facade, looking completely certain. I put the phone face down on the kitchen table without saying anything at all. Joel saw me do it and gave it room the way he gave everything room. The thing is, his quietness used to feel like understanding, and then it changed. 3 weeks earlier, Declan Park had said something at a fair that stayed with me. He said I had the best eye in every room I entered. Just like that. My husband was 12 feet away and did not hear any of it then. That night, I set my phone face down on the counter without any real reason. Later, Joel asked if I wanted to watch something, and I said that I did. The mood between us that evening was fine, and I was somewhere else entirely. The benefit dinner was held in a hotel ballroom on a cold Friday evening. I arrived with Petra and Marcus and 2 collectors from our patronage circle already. Orla had a media pass for a cultural magazine she had recently taken on. Joel sat beside me in a dark jacket, and he had dressed for the evening. He looked appropriate and attentive, and he never needed a room to perform anything. The thing as appropriate had started to feel like its own kind of distance. He knew the names of the 3 collectors at our table before they introduced themselves. He had looked them up before the dinner because he always prepared for my world. He did not tell me he had done it, and I found out later. That was the thing about Joel that I had stopped being able to receive. Declan arrived during the second course and came directly over to our table then. He came as a collector who had bought 3 significant works from Meridian that year. He moved through the ballroom like a person who had decided all rooms were his. He pulled a chair close and talked about the Tbilisi artist I had been tracking. He had seen her work at a satellite fair in Vienna the previous spring already. He named 2 specific canvases and described her palette shift between them with real precision. This was not performance on his part, and I knew it, and it worked anyway. He asked intelligent questions about the acquisition without ever asking about the loan terms. Joel sat to my right and asked a good question about the artist's earlier work. Declan acknowledged the question with a nod that placed Joel and moved smoothly past him. Joel did not react to the nod, and I did not look at him. Something in me wanted to put distance between myself and my husband's careful correctness. The thing is, I could not have named what I wanted in its place. I wanted someone to talk to me the way Declan talked about the painting. I wanted to be the subject of that kind of specific and unhesitating attention. Near the end of the evening, Declan asked for my card for a project collaboration. He said his gallery was expanding to the West Coast, and he wanted my input. I had the gallery's standard cards in my jacket pocket, and I reached past them. I gave him my personal card instead of the one that belonged to the gallery. Joel was watching from across the table and he saw exactly what I did. He said nothing in the ballroom and he said nothing in the elevator after. In the car, he asked about the card in exactly the way he asked things. He said Declan's name had appeared in my message notifications more than once recently. He asked why a fellow dealer would need my personal number instead of the gallery's. He was not angry, and he asked the way he asked about everything specific, like a man checking whether a particular wall was still doing what walls are for. I told him it was the gallery card, and I said it without hesitating. The thing is, I said it with the calm of someone not making a scene. He looked out the passenger window and he did not argue with the answer. The mood in the car went flat in a way I had come to recognize. He was organizing something, and his organizing always scared me more than his anger. I told him he had been turning my professional contacts into personal threats for years. I said the word surveillance, and then I let the car stay quiet afterward. He said it was a specific question and not a pattern accusation at all. I told him the question itself was the surveillance, and I looked out my window. He said nothing more, and the rest of the drive was completely without sound. Orla drove me home from a gallery event the following week and asked about Declan. She had met him briefly years before through a shared client connection between them. She asked with no judgment in her voice at all, and no warning either. The thing is, a tone without judgment can still function as a permission slip. She said Declan had looked at me like I was the only interesting presence there. I told her I did not know what she meant by any of that. She laughed, and that laugh meant she knew exactly what she had been saying. Orla had married young and divorced young and never stopped paying for having stayed. She lived through my choices because watching them felt like taking them herself somehow. I understood that then, in the way you understand things you choose not to say. She asked whether something was happening there, and I said I did not know. That answer was close enough to honest that I could hide behind it comfortably. 3 days later, Declan sent a message about the Los Angeles Art Fair schedule. He wanted me to come as a featured selector for a major acquisition presentation there. He said it was a genuine professional honor and the kind that built real reputation. He mentioned that we would be at the same hotel, and he hoped that worked. It was a real professional invitation, and I spent 2 days telling myself that. I said it was fine, and I did not tell Joel any part of it. 2 weeks passed, and 3 more messages came from Declan about the hotel and schedule. I answered all of them and kept my phone angled away on the kitchen counter. Yusuf had been at the benefit dinner, and he had noticed enough that night. He saw my face change when Declan came to the table and stayed there. He saw Joel's hand go still on the table once while Declan was talking. At the end of the evening, he shook Joel's hand for a beat too long. He did not shake mine in the same way at all, and I noticed. After that night, his messages went to Joel directly and stopped coming to me. I told myself he was simplifying his contact list, and I believed that briefly. Petra mentioned at the gallery the following week that she had noticed our table. She said the energy there had been interesting and framed it as a joke. She did not press it, and she did not stay with it past one sentence. The thing is, she had noticed, and now I knew that she had noticed. The circle around me had begun to quietly calibrate without anyone naming what they saw. The spring opening was the largest show I had built in 2 years. 6 artists, 2 gallery spaces, a mezzanine, and 6 months of my life. Every loan agreement and lighting specification had moved through my office that year. I had checked every label and every sightline 3 times before opening. The show was exactly what I thought a strong show should look like. I had 2 messages from Declan that week about the Los Angeles trip. He had confirmed the hotel and the event schedule and the arrival time. I had not told Joel about Los Angeles or about Declan's invitation at all. Both of those facts were present in my body for the whole evening. Joel arrived in his dark jacket, and he had dressed carefully for this. He knew 3 of the 6 artists by name before anyone introduced them. He had looked them up before the opening because he always prepared this way. He found one of the artists in the first hour and talked with her. He had met her at a previous opening and had remembered what she said. I watched the conversation from across the room with a glass of wine. The thing is, he was doing all of this for my sake entirely. He was navigating my world on my behalf with preparation and real effort. I watched it, and I thought about Declan, who never needed any briefing. A collector named Arthur Vance found me near the end of the first hour. He was silver-haired and well-known, and he had bought from us before. He asked about my husband's work and confused Joel with another sculptor that night. It was a reasonable mistake, and a correction would have taken me 10 seconds. Instead, I smiled and said that Joel worked in a completely different science. My voice carried something, and two people nearby turned their heads toward me. Arthur Vance laughed, and the two people who turned looked from me to Joel. Joel was 15 feet away, and he was talking easily with a sculptor. He looked comfortable, and he looked proud of exactly where he was standing. He was not performing anything for anyone in that room that evening at all. That ease was the specific thing that cracked something in me right then. I held my wine glass and I let what I had just done sit. The two mugs from our pottery class were on the welcome table near the door. I had placed them there as part of a display about handmade objects. The display was connected to the gallery's current artist residence program that year. Joel's mug with his J painted on it was placed on the right side. I had not thought to ask before I used his mug in the display. He saw both mugs when he first came in, and he stopped briefly. He looked at his mug sitting there on the table and said nothing. I watched him register it, and I watched him choose not to say anything. Then he moved into the room and the conversation moved with him away from me. Declan arrived 40 minutes into the opening with two other dealers behind him. His attention swept the room in one slow pass and came to rest on me. I moved through the rest of the show differently from that point onward. The thing is, I was aware of this shift as it was happening. I called it professionalism because professionalism had a clean shape I could use. I had been telling myself this for 6 weeks, and the word had taken hold. Declan came to me near the main gallery and talked about the show directly. He named 2 specific works and described what made them strong with real precision. 3 collectors were nearby, and he said it where all 3 of them heard. I talked to him for 10 minutes in front of people who mattered to me. He talked about my work like it was the most interesting thing in the room. He made me feel like the most interesting object in any room I entered. The thing is, this was the register I had grown up needing to be in. Joel came to my side when Declan had moved on to another collector. He said quietly that we should step outside for just a moment together. He did not raise his voice and his face stayed completely controlled throughout. I heard the word outside and I heard it as a kind of trap. The thing is, his quiet was always what frightened me more than anger. I said his name loudly enough that Orla turned her head toward us. I told him he was making my professional evening into his own private scene. I said I had a gallery full of people I was responsible for tonight. I said this where Orla and Marcus and 2 collectors could hear me clearly. I said it where people could hear that I was the one being reasonable. Orla looked at her shoes and she did not look up for a moment. Marcus was standing near the entrance and he looked past both of us. Joel said nothing in response to any of what I had said to him. He said they would talk at home and then he moved back inside calmly. His quiet did not feel like peace, and it had not for some time. It felt like a door I had pushed closed from entirely the wrong side. Later, I was signing a limited print for Arthur Vance near the catalogue table. My hand shook once on the pen, and I made the signature deliberately larger. Nobody in the room saw the shake except Declan, who was 4 feet away. He was watching me from that exact distance, and I know he saw it. I did not look at him after, and I moved to the next collector. Orla laughed at something I said near the close of the evening together. Her laugh ended half a beat later than it should have ended that night. I noticed the half beat, and I told myself she was simply tired. The thing is, I had been noticing these small things and naming them nothing. In the car, he did not speak, and his hands stayed on the wheel. Something between us had the weight of a thing let go on one side. On the other side, it was still being held and had not been released. He did not speak the whole way home, and I counted the traffic lights. Claudine came to the apartment on a Tuesday afternoon without calling first. She wore a coat she had owned for several years and no makeup. She taught secondary school art, and she had known me for 6 years exactly. She came without malice, and she came without any particular softness either. She stood in the doorway and said she had been sitting with something for months. 3 months was the number she gave, and she gave it like a fact. She said Joel had been leaving for the institute an hour early every morning. She said he did it because he did not know what face to have. She meant the face he would need in the apartment with me there. She said this the way she corrected students, without cruelty and without softness. Just the observation placed in the room and left there for me to hold. I sat down, and I softened my voice in the way I knew how. I offered tea, and I used the word we with careful and deliberate precision. I said things had been complicated and that work had been putting pressure on us. I said long partnerships sometimes needed recalibration, and I believed it sounded true. I produced enough partial truth to make the conversation feel like it was addressed. Claudine watched me do all of this, and her face did not change once. She had spent 20 years watching 16-year-olds perform sincerity in her classroom. She knew the difference between a person speaking and a person making the shape. She left 20 minutes later, and she did not accept the tea I offered. She did not raise her voice at any point during the entire visit. She did not need to, and I think she knew she did not need to. The conversation had done what she came to do without her raising anything. That afternoon, I went to the gallery storage room to find an old catalogue. I needed it for a donor meeting that was scheduled for the following morning. The catalogue I wanted was behind several others from shows 4 years earlier. I pulled them out in a stack and found the one I needed at the bottom. When I opened the back cover to check the edition number, something fell. A folded piece of paper came out from between the cover and the end paper. I knew Joel's handwriting before I had fully unfolded the paper in my hand. He pressed down when he wrote, and the words went slightly through the paper. The note said, "This is where I want to be every Friday for the rest." For the rest of my life was how the sentence finished on that page. He had written it the night of my first major acquisition show 4 years ago. The show had been a risk, and I had been terrified it would fail completely. I had drunk 2 glasses of wine too quickly and stood in the back corner. I had watched people move through the work and been afraid to hear their thoughts. He had written this note and put it somewhere I was meant to find it. Or he had meant to give it to me and forgotten, and I had filed it. Either way, I had been carrying it for 4 years without knowing it was there. I held the note, and something moved in me that required me to stay still. It was not guilt exactly, and it did not have a clean name at all. He had learned the names of every artist in every show I had built. He had brought dinner to the loading dock on the cold November evening. He had shown up at every opening and every difficult evening without being asked. He had written this note and tucked it somewhere, and I was finding it now. What I almost saw was that he had been choosing me in the only language he had, that his presence and his preparation and his showing up were not management. They were love in the only register that was available to him. I almost understood that my wound had been translating his steadiness into absence for years. I almost saw that I had stopped being able to receive what he was giving me. The door was open, and I stood there with the paper in my hand. Then I folded the note and put it into my coat pocket carefully. I told myself it was a line from someone who had stopped meaning it. I told myself he had stopped meaning it around the time he stopped pushing. Then I took out my phone and sent Declan a message about the hotel floor. That was how I closed the door, and it took less than 1 full minute. That evening, Joel was at the kitchen table when I came home from the gallery. His research notes were spread out, and his mug was in his hand. He looked up when I came in, and he did not say anything first. Then he said quietly that he had been trying to learn my language for years. He said he thought he might have been speaking the wrong one entirely. It was the closest thing to an open door that he had offered in months. It was not an accusation, and it was not an apology, and it was real. I heard it as a passive complaint, dressed up as something more generous than that. I told him that asking people to translate themselves was not any form of love. I said it and I went to the bedroom before he could say anything back. The thing is, I heard it wrong because of how I was built to hear things. My father had never once adjusted his language for anyone in the room. Everyone adjusted for him, and that had felt like the natural order of things. Joel offering to learn felt like an admission he had failed, and not like a gift. In the morning he was up before me and already gone from the apartment. The mug with his initial was on the drying rack, washed and placed right side up. It was in exactly the right position, and the rightness of it stayed with me. Petra's last direct message had come 5 days earlier, and it was professional. Orla's last message had gone to a group thread, and not to me directly. Yusuf had not written in 3 weeks, and I had stopped expecting him to. The note was still in my coat pocket, and I had not taken it out. On Saturday morning, Joel was in the kitchen when I came out first. He was making coffee and his back was to me when I started talking. I told him about the Los Angeles trip while he was still at the counter. I mentioned the invitation and the event role and the hotel without pausing. I mentioned Declan's name the way you mention someone who is not hidden. I said I was going and I said it like a decision already made. Joel turned from the counter and he looked at me for a moment. He asked when I had known about the trip and the invitation itself. He asked how long Declan had been part of the planning for this. I said 6 weeks and I said it without looking away from him. I said the invitation had come through Declan and the trip was professional. He asked why I had not mentioned any of it until this particular morning. The thing is, I told him the truth about that part at least. I said I had not wanted to have the conversation we were now having. He stood there and he was very still, and the stillness had a direction. It moved the way weather moves when you can see it coming from distance. There was no question about where it was heading when it arrived. Then I said the thing that was completely and accurately true about him. I told him he had been deciding for years that my silence meant space. I told him every time I pulled away he had stepped back instead of forward. I said he had read my distance as preference rather than a call to him. I said he had treated my loneliness like weather he was waiting out patiently. I said this was why I was going to Los Angeles, and not Declan himself. I said it was the years, and not the man, and I believed that then. He stood with the coffee he had made, and he did not speak yet. The silence lasted long enough that it became its own kind of answer entirely. He could not refute what I had said because it was accurate and true. He had done exactly what I described, and he knew it and I knew it. Being right about his flaw did not cover what I was choosing, though. Then he said that if I went on this trip, he would handle things. He said he would handle things properly, and those were the exact words he used. His voice did not rise and he did not add anything after that. He set the coffee cup on the counter and he looked at me directly. Then he offered one door and he offered it without repeating himself at all. He said 1 hour that evening with no phones and no audience present. He said just the two of us and the whole truth from both sides. He said he could do that if I was willing to do that too. It was one offer and he made it once and he did not beg. I told him conversations with him always ended the same particular way. I said I always left them feeling like I had failed some kind of inspection. I said I did not have time for another one of those conversations now. I turned toward my phone and he picked up his keys from the counter. He did not slam anything, and he did not raise his voice at all. He went out and the door closed behind him without any dramatic sound. The apartment was quiet after he left, and I stood in it, alone. The thing is, I had believed at some low level that he would return. I had believed his constancy meant he would keep trying past any reasonable point. He had not come back through the door, and the apartment stayed quiet. I called Orla and the phone rang 4 times before reaching her voicemail. I called again and it rang 4 times and reached her voicemail again. I sent a message and I watched the screen and I waited for something. At 4:22 in the afternoon, a read receipt appeared below my message. It stayed there and nothing followed it and nothing came after that. 3 messages and 2 calls and 1 red receipt sitting there without answer. I called Declan and he answered on the second ring and he was warm. He talked about the hotel and the opening night event and the schedule. He talked about a collector I needed to meet on the second evening there. He sounded like a man who had already decided how the next 3 days looked. He did not ask how I was doing or ask about anything at home. He did not ask about Joel, and he had his own version already planned. The thing is, I heard what I needed to hear in his voice then. The gap between what he was offering and what I was receiving was invisible. I told myself the trip was professional, and I told myself it clearly. I came home late that night, and the apartment was completely quiet inside. Joel's coat was not on the hook beside the door where it belonged. On the kitchen counter, his mug was sitting where it had not been before. He had moved it from the shelf to the counter where I would see it. The thing is, he had placed it exactly where I could not miss it. Beside the mug, there was an envelope with my full name written on it. Both of my names were written there in his handwriting on the front. It was the same handwriting as the note I had been carrying in my pocket. I stood at the counter and I looked at the envelope for a long time. I did not open it that night, and I told myself I was tired. The thing is, I did not open it because I knew what handling things meant. I knew what properly meant when he said it in that particular voice. I put my bag down and I left the envelope exactly where he had placed it. I went to the bedroom and the apartment was the quietest it had ever been. His mug was on the counter and the note was still inside my coat pocket. Both of them were in the apartment with me and he was not there anymore. The mediation suite was on the 4th floor, 3 blocks from the courthouse. The room had beige walls and a glass table and 1 tissue box. Patricia Chow introduced herself and explained the process without any opinion present. Joel was already seated when I arrived and he had a folder. Claudine sat beside him and she had made a decision about her position. He looked the way he looked when he had finished with uncertainty completely. Patricia placed the document in front of me before I had fully sat. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage with temporary orders attached. The temporary orders covered the apartment and the joint accounts and all communication. The first hearing was listed for the 19th at 9 in the morning. I looked at Joel's full name printed directly beside my name on the page. I had fixed artists' names to gallery walls for 15 years without hesitation. I understood what it meant to fix a name to a surface permanently. Patricia went through the evidentiary record and nothing in it was new. The tagged photo from the hotel rooftop in Los Angeles was there first. I had gone 3 days after the envelope and told myself it was a bluff. The photo was posted to the gallery account with Declan's name in the caption. The hotel confirmation was there and 4 months of call records followed. All as screenshots of our text thread were placed in the middle of everything. I had written that I was done pretending Joel's silence was love there. She had forwarded them to Joel 6 weeks ago without any message attached. I tried to say one trip did not constitute the pattern they were describing. I used the word honesty twice, and it landed with less weight each time. Patricia asked why I had worn the ring and used the joint accounts throughout. She asked why I had described the marriage as ongoing while calling it finished. I had no answer that moved anything in that particular room at all. My phone had a message from Declan sent while I was in the waiting area. He hoped things were settling and said the Los Angeles trip had been a lot. He said he valued my professional opinion and looked forward to future collaboration. He said he was heading back to handle some things at the gallery now. That was the entire message and nothing followed it at any point after. 5 things changed in the weeks after the mediation appointment that morning. I moved into a 1-bedroom above a cafe with espresso machines starting at 6. The joint accounts were frozen and 2 vendor delays arrived the same week together. Petra's last contact was a read receipt and Yusuf had not written at all. Claudine did not speak to me in the elevator after the mediation ended. Declan posted the West Coast expansions 6 weeks later with a different curator named. The board chair called about the tagged photo and the donor difficulty it caused. His mug was not in the apartment when I packed my things to leave. He had taken it during one of his 2 visits while I was working. I looked for it in the boxes before I moved, and it was simply gone. I stood in the kitchen with the box open and I did not move. I have the mug with my initial on the shelf in the rented apartment. I brought it without deciding to, and I have used it every single morning. The note is still inside the catalogue on the shelf above the window. The thing is, I had never thought that he would be the one to go. This morning I found the note again and I read it once through. Then I put it back and made coffee in the only mug I had left.